It is time to check in on the priorities of corn growers. Ethanol tariffs, biofuel market development, crop insurance, farm bill, those will all be part of the conversation. And it's time to check up on what's happening in the energy markets. The grain markets are sensitive to what's happening in energy trade, including progress on some of the biofuels policies.
Live on National Joseph Day via Farm Journal broadcast, this is AgriTalk. This morning, we'll have a conversation with Harold Wolle, president of the National Corn Growers Association, and Jordan Fife, president of BioUrja Trading. Right after the news with Michelle Rook, we'll speak with Karen Bonert of Farm Journal's Milk. I'm producer Big Apple Joseph Stackler, and now the host of AgriTalk, Chip Flory.
Amazing. National Joseph Day is celebrated every year on April 16. It appreciates the strong and classic name Joseph, whose roots started in the Old Testament of the Bible with a story of a young boy with 11 jealous siblings. Wow. There you go.
Yep. Carry on the tradition.
There it is. Well, happy Joseph's Day.
Thanks.
You're welcome. And thank you, Big Apple Joe. This is AgriTalk. Glad that you are joining us here this morning. Davis has got a couple of days off. I believe he will be back with us tomorrow, unless he skips out. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think he'll be back with us tomorrow. So looking forward to getting Davis back. We've got quite the show coming your way. Conversation with Harold Wolle, president of the National Corn Growers Association. We're going to check in on the priorities, some of the efforts that are being made on the policy front, including on crop insurance. It's not as cut and dry as it might seem with crop insurance. There are some asks that are out there and some ways to make the program better for corn growers going forward, and we'll talk about that with Harold coming up in just a bit. Then at the bottom of the hour, we're going to get Jordan Fife in here. Jordan is the president of trading at BioUrja down in Houston, and he is going to fill us in on what the crude oil markets are paying closest attention to and where things might be going from here. We'll get into some of the geopolitical issues out there as well. All right, joining us now, Michelle Rook, national reporter, Farm Journal broadcast. Hey, Michelle, how's it going?
Hey, not too bad. We are getting some rain up here in the Dakotas this morning.
Yeah.
But we'll take it. We needed it.
And some storms along with it, isn't there?
Yeah, there was, I know down in southwestern South Dakota, there were some baseball size hail and that sort of thing, which we always hate to see, but at least there weren't any crops to be hurt. So
right. Yeah, exactly. If it's going to come, that's probably a good time of the year to get it. Severe thunderstorm warning remains in effect until 10:15 Central Time, northwestern Clay, northeastern Yankton, and Turner counties. So they're in the southeast part of the state. There is a warning in place. Well, maybe they just took it off. No, it's still there. It is still in place. And there's also a warning down in west central Missouri to pay attention to. Storms are going to be moving their way through all day long. All right, but let's get to it. What do you got in the news?
Well, USDA's crop progress report yesterday showing corn 6% planted, 5% is the average. Missouri led the country with a record fast pace of 26% planted on corn. Soybean planting was faster than expected, 3%, 2 points ahead of average. Spring wheat now 7%, seeded cotton at 8%. Winter wheat came in 55%, good to excellent, down a point. Kansas dropped 6 points at 43%. Now the winter wheat crop 11% headed, 4% ahead of normal. In spring wheat planting, we already gave you that, but it looks like that's going to be slowed down now due to the weather.
Yep.
USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, or APHIS, will continue to use the name highly pathogenic avian influenza relative to the current situation in dairy, despite an aborted attempt by the American Association of Bovine Practitioners to change that name to bovine influenza A virus. They say that according to their perspective, highly path avian influenza, or H5N1, those are the most scientifically accurate terms to describe the virus. The end of Panama's dry season is bringing hope for increased traffic through the Panama Canal as recent rainfalls provided some relief. The Panama Canal authorities cautiously optimistic about returning to normal operations by 2025. But again, this depends on weather conditions.
Yeah.
House Speaker Mike Johnson said the chamber will vote this week on Ukraine and Israel aid. Johnson made the proposal for votes on 4 separate bills, including funding Taiwan and others that would impose more sanctions on Iran and allow Ukraine to cash in on profits from frozen Russian assets. Pro-Farmers Jim Wiesmeyer says splitting the aid into separate packages could actually ease the passage. And meanwhile, Representative Marjorie Taylor, who threatened to force a vote to depose Johnson if the House considers Ukraine aid, said last night she hasn't made a decision yet whether to proceed with that. Meanwhile, the House has imposed sanctions on Chinese financial institutions for purchasing Iranian crude. That's part of the package in response to Iran's attack on Israel. In remarks to reporters Monday at the North American Ag Journalists meeting, USDA Secretary Tom Vilsack highlighted the challenge of passing a bipartisan farm bill amidst a closely divided Congress. He is proposing utilizing the CCC to support farmers and says maybe Congress could also alleviate budgetary challenges by making WIC mandatory.
Right. Yeah, Michelle, he's been talking about tapping into the CCC to help out on Title I or the safety net programs for quite some time. So we'll see if that makes any progress now.
Yeah, I asked Senator Bozeman about that during the hearing on Friday, and he said that is a likely possibility.
Okay. All right. Hey, thank you, Michelle. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
All right, let's bring in Karen Boner, editor of Farm Journal's Milk. Good morning, Karen.
Hi, Chip.
Hey, talk to me about what you learned in Denver about heifer replacements.
Yeah, well, I was attending the Dairy Calf and Heifer annual conference, Chip. I also went on a tour to the Five Rivers Cattle Feed Yard, where they feed a lot of cows, 100,000 on one site. And so, in fact, 20,000 of those were approximately beef on dairy cattle, those Jersey Charolais crosses. But the question that was really unfolding is understanding the need of replacement dairy heifers and understanding the economics of that. And I think we've gotten ourselves in a predicament because we've done a great job of raising heifers, especially with sex semen. And now with beef on dairy being utilized, producers kind of, as we've talked over the time, have swung the other way. So the real question is understanding the cost that goes into raising these dairy heifers, because one economist that spoke at the conference said it's still expensive to purchase dairy cattle and that we can raise them cheaper than we can buy them. So producers really need to kind of look at their inventory and making sure that they have enough heifer replacements or slightly over will be essential, especially as a lot of these farms at this conference per se, we're talking about growth, whether it was expanding their current location or looking at an additional site to have a dairy. So we got to make sure that we're making enough dairy replacements. Yeah. But this is an easier said than done conversation because of that, what we're getting paid for those beef cross calves.
Yep, it is a topic of conversation that I think is coming up more and more often, Karen, and the right numbers, the right kind, the right everything when it comes to putting that replacement heifer into the rotation is absolutely critical. Good stuff, Karen. Thank you.
Thanks, Chip.
You bet. Learn more about it, www.dairyherd.com. We're going to talk with Harold Wolle from NCGA next.
Knowledge is power. We're here to charge your batteries. AgriTalk.
It's a busy time of the year for corn growers. Got the crop going in the ground, and we've got a lot of farm state lawmakers, non-farm state lawmakers in place deciding on some legislation. They're in session and making decisions, and the National Corn Growers Association is there trying to do some education. And we're going to find out what's on the top of the priority list at NCGA right now from Harold Wolle. Harold is the president of the National Corn Growers Association up in Minnesota. How are you, Harold?
Real good, Chip. Nice rainy morning here. There's been some crops planted in southern Minnesota, so a little rain will get them started.
You bet. You bet. I was going to ask if you got rained out this morning. I'm glad we're not just pulling you out of the field.
It's the weather that has me sitting in the office today, but every so often you need a day in the office.
There you go. There you go. Okay, let's talk about a couple of things on the priority list there at NCGA. I know that you sent Ken into D.C. here not too long ago to talk about the Federal Agriculture Risk Management Enhancement and Resiliency Act, the Farmer Act. It's sponsored by Senator John Hoeven out of North Dakota, but it's about crop insurance. What exactly is this about, Harold?
Well, it's about increasing the premium support level for certain plans of insurance.
Okay.
So,
and go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, it would increase the premium support for revenue protection and yield protection policies at the 80% coverage level from 68% to 77%, at the 85% coverage level from 53% to 68%.
Okay.
And it would also change the coverage level and premium subsidy under the supplemental coverage option. So it increases the premium support for the supplemental coverage option from 65% to 80% and increases the SCO coverage level from 86% to 90%. So just some enhancements for crop insurance. As you well know, crop insurance is the number one risk management tool that our nation's corn farmers have, and NCGA is always supportive of improving crop insurance. So that's what Senator Hoeven's bill would do.
Yeah, and basically what it does is it kind of just updates it and gets it up to date with reality on what's happening out there on the farm and the risk that producers are facing, right?
Absolutely. We are entering a period of lower profitability, and that increases our risk. So to have these tools in our toolbox is very important.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, is that going to be a standalone, Harold, or would that be tagged on to the Farm Bill if we can see any progress there?
Well, as I understand it, this is primarily a marker bill that gets these ideas out in front of Congress, and then I do believe that the changes would need to be made in the Farm Bill.
Okay. All right. Are you hearing anything on the Farm Bill as far as what the timing is going to be? The latest that we've heard, Harold, is that House Ag Committee Chairman Thompson, Glenn Thompson, hopes to have the chairman's mark out by the middle of May. That is kind of the next step that we need to see taken in this. Is that right?
I believe you are correct, and that is what NCGA folks are hearing as well too.
Okay.
Nothing written down has been released yet. So, yeah, we're hoping they are compromising and going to make some progress on this Farm Bill and get her done. At least, it's not like they are saying, hey, we're not going to deal with this until after the election. So I'm very glad that Chairman Thompson and everybody involved on the House and Senate Ag Committee are wanting to get this done this spring.
Right. Okay. Let's talk about a couple of EPA issues, because one of them, well, I guess this one isn't an EPA issue. It's the International Trade Commission. You were in D.C. not that long ago testifying on why it's important to why imports of 2,4-D and other crop protection tools are important. Tell us about that trip.
Well, Corteva has filed a petition with the International Trade Commission to have anti-dumping and countervailing duties applied to imports of 2,4-D acid from India and China. So an anti-dumping duty is levied when a product is being imported below the cost of production. A countervailing duty is implemented when a country's government unfairly subsidizes the production of that commodity. So Corteva is maintaining that both of those situations apply to imports of the 2,4-D acid from both of those countries. If that would happen, it would increase the cost of 2,4-D to our nation's corn and soybean farmers, to all of our farmers. So, we don't use a lot of 2,4-D, but it's an important part of a conservation system. If we're going to burn down the weeds before we plant, 2,4-D is one of the staple commodities that's used, pesticides that used to control those broadleaf weeds. So a very important, long time chemical that we need to have in our toolbox at a reasonable price. Here again, as this cost price squeeze affects the nation's farmers, this becomes more and more important that we have access to these tools at affordable prices.
Yeah, it so many times it feels like there are rules and regulations that get in the way of affordability on some of these products, and this is the potential here again. Let's talk about EPA's tailpipe rule, because, Harold, this just feels like a mess. The administration keeps proposing what seem to be extremely difficult to reach EV use goals, electric vehicle use goals. And while they're doing that, they're ignoring the potential tailpipe emission reductions from using ethanol, higher blends of ethanol. Reducing the tailpipe emissions is a goal that we can get behind. It's just the administration's proposals to achieve those goals are kind of a big problem because they're ignoring the higher blends of ethanol, right?
I agree. If we want to decarbonize the transportation system right now, we need to use more ethanol because ethanol has a lower carbon intensity score than straight up gasoline. So, and I always like to say, we know how to grow the feedstock corn. We know how to process it. We've got our biorefineries in place. We know how to store the corn. We know how to store the ethanol. We know we've got the distribution system in place. Electricity has tremendous problems in all those arenas. So we're ready right now. We need to use higher blends.
Yeah, and part of the problem for the electricity, and I'll say it for you here, it's just the manufacturing of the batteries and distribution of those batteries and the wear and tear and roads and everything that comes into play with those batteries. So it is not as clear cut or as easy as the administration is trying to make it out to be with their idea that we just go to EVs and all problems will be solved. So need to follow the path here and connect the dots. Part of that is the pathway for corn-based ethanol into the sustainable aviation fuel market. Harold, any progress there?
We are anxiously awaiting what the GREET modeling is going to contain. I certainly advocate that corn can be grown to be a low carbon fuel for feedstock for the aviation fuel industry, and I think there's a number of other folks that realize that too. So we need to get the modeling right so that low carbon corn qualifies as the feedstock. Yeah. And I'm hopeful that that's going to happen. And we've been anxiously awaiting the release of this GREET model. And although at the same time, I think it behooves all of us to have a little patience so that it gets done right. It's a different can of worms when you're dealing with Treasury and a tax credit. Tax fraud's a very serious issue, and we want this to be able to move forward and farmers not have to worry about being out of compliance with the tax code.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Fair point. We've only got about 30 seconds, but I want to touch this real quick. Efforts to remove Brazil's tariffs on imports of U.S. ethanol. Any chance that that's going to happen?
I don't know. We need to emphasize that again and again. Brazil charges us an 18% tariff for our ethanol going into their country, and we only charge them 2.4%. That's not right.
Yeah, it certainly is not. Harold, good luck this spring. Stay safe, and we'll talk with you again soon, okay?
Talk to you later, Chip.
You bet. Harold Wolle, president of the National Corn Growers Association. Okay, we're going to check in with Brian Grady and the markets here in just a moment. And then it's time for a conversation with Jordan Fife from BioUrja here on AgriTalk.
Time for Markets Now with the experts from ProFarmer.
Joining us now, ProFarmer editor Brian Grady. Just a little follow-through from yesterday in the grains. Brian, what's going on?
Yeah, absolutely, Chip. And just kind of a lack of fresh news out there today. The planting pace is running a little bit ahead of normal, though it's early and just not much for bulls to get excited about. So, like you mentioned, we faced some price pressure on Monday, follow through selling here to open up on Tuesday, and we'll have to see. Probably the best news if you're a bull is that it isn't active selling pressure at this point. The bad news is that we just can't generate buyer interest.
Yeah, it's one of those days that where we trade from this point forward is going to be really important for the rest of the week, isn't it? I mean, if they can accelerate this pressure into the close today, it's not going to look very good for the rest of the week.
No, and we kind of got to, these type of days, you got to keep an eye on the technicals. If they start to erode and you see increased selling pressure off that, then, that's not a good sign. If the support levels hold and you bounce off there, then potentially you can get some corrective buying going.
Gotcha. We got a nice rally going in the cattle complex.
Yeah, speaking of corrective buying, I mean, that market's been beaten down kind of pretty hard recently and moderate to strong gains here at mid-morning. And so we'll see. I think what we probably need to see for the cash market to stabilize is for the futures to extend these corrective gains, wholesale beef prices to firm up and that type of stuff. So we'll see as we move forward through the week. And the hog market, it bounced, had some losses last week, but bouncing back here at mid-morning as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. We'll talk to you later. That is ProFarmer editor Brian Grady on Markets Now.
Opinions expressed on AgriTalk do not necessarily reflect the views of Farm Journal Broadcasting, affiliate stations, or sponsors. The chickens have come home to roost. Find out whose fence they're perched on today on AgriTalk.
Jordan, that's got to be killing you. A little Nickelback for walk-up music. How do you feel about that?
It's not my cup of tea. I like it a little faster and a little louder, but it's okay. It's okay. I'll let it go.
Gotcha. Jordan Fife, president of BioUrja Trading, is our guest right now. It's good to talk with you again, Jordan, buddy. Okay.
Good to talk to you, Chip.
Let's jump right into it here because these energy markets. The ag markets are paying attention to what is happening in the energy trade. There's no question about that. And I just in general, how are the energy markets doing? There are several happenings around the globe that the energy markets have got to keep tabs on right now. How are they doing?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. It's not one issue that we're dealing with in the energy markets. It's several. The biggest one that's getting the most headlines right now is Israel and Gaza, and rightfully so. And now the involvement with Iran. Iran is, of course, the third largest member of OPEC in terms of oil production behind Saudi Arabia and Iraq. So it's a big deal when you have these kind of geopolitical risks going on. But as you alluded to earlier, it's not just what's going on in Israel and Gaza and then subsequently what's happening with Iran. There's also what's going on in Russia. And Russia's oil production and refining is down right now 10%. It was down 14% last month, so it's getting a little bit back. But Ukraine has successfully hit several of their refineries with drones. So that's another thing that you've got going on. And then, one other big note is what's going on in the Red Sea. We have the Houthis that are disrupting trade there. So you have major implications with geopolitical risk going on in multiple locations right now. And what's happening is we're seeing an increase in Brent $95 and $100 calls. You're seeing Goldman. You're seeing other large banks calling for $100 oil. And I think we could easily see that happen if we don't see a de-escalation in multiple areas of geopolitical risk.
Okay. Iran and OPEC in particular. I get questions all the time, Jordan, about just how important OPEC production is, how much influence it has on the price of gas at a pump in the U.S. Explain that to us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got a massive impact on it because remember, there are two different benchmarks for crude oil. One is Brent, and that is the North Sea up in Scotland. But that is the rest of the world. Think of it that way. And the second is WTI, or West Texas Intermediate. And the United States is the largest producer of oil. I've said that on this show and multiple other times, and it's just a fact. But when you have OPEC that supplies a ton of the rest of the world, you're talking parts of Europe, you're talking parts of Asia, you're talking obviously the Middle East, you're talking parts of South America even, and Africa. Their influence on the price of oil is huge. And that's going to just translate again because the WTI Brent spread is only going to be able to separate so much before basically the arb will blow up to the point where it won't make mathematical sense. So when OPEC talks, it will eventually trickle down to the pump in the United States. It's not a 1-for-1, but it is meaningful. And the spread between Brent and TI right now is holding in there. And I expect it to. The United States continues to produce record every single month, and I think it will continue. We just had several reports that down wells that have been abandoned are basically being looked at again. I think eventually we're going to overshoot the landing. That's what all markets do. We'll eventually overproduce. But for right now, this is actually a very advantageous time for people that are producing oil in the United States. They are just printing money.
Wow. Okay. I want to come back to that because, I want to come back to that. Russia. Does Russia, in the situation in Ukraine and its relationship with OPEC, does it still have the potential or the ability to influence price in Europe and around the globe?
Yes, but I mean, they are, with sanctions that are going on right now, they're selling at a discount. That's a fact. They're selling at a discount, but their largest importer right now is China. And China is the largest importer of oil, period. In 2023, they were the largest importer of oil. I think they were up like 10% year on year in terms of oil imports, but they are exporting Russia a ton to China right now. And they're the largest counterpart. Their ability is still very important, but it has waned a little bit with lack of trading partners. But that being said, China and India have stepped up huge, and they're just buying discounted oil, which helps their economies, pretty sizably.
Well, China, there's another variable that's tough, if not impossible to measure here on the energy markets because their economic growth or lack of economic growth. I just wonder how sustainable is all this demand for energy into China?
That's a great question. And, just to add even a further wrinkle to that, there was reports last month that 40% of all cars sold in the month of March in China were EV. They're EV. And I said this on a podcast earlier this week, or maybe last week. My timelines get hazy. But I have an old boss that lives in Thailand, and he went to a car expo there, and literally every car at the expo was EV. Not one internal combustion engine there. So when you talk about demand in China and how it really adds up, it's so difficult to do. It's a black box over there. You can't get the data like you do out of the EIA, and it's just hard to piece it all together. So you've got increase in EVs, you've got an increase in Russian crude oil coming in, you've got a growing population, but to your point, it's not growing like it was before.
Right.
It's very difficult to put it all together and really add up where all the pieces go. Long term, I think you will see a decrease in oil consumption there. Short term, I think they've still got a pretty steep climb to go, and we'll see a lot of oil exported to China and refined there. They're still going to be leading the way in terms of demand for the next, call it, decade or two.
Well, they're not putting up all those coal-fired electric plants to let them sit idle, are they?
That's right. No. You don't buy a Ferrari and park it in the garage. When you do that, they're showing their hand pretty strongly. I agree with you.
Yeah, no doubt. Okay, talk to me about just the general outlook. You said the banks are placing their bets on $100 crude with the call options. Is it kind of a given that we're going to get there?
I'm not giving trading advice, but
right.
In my opinion, I think we're going to touch $100 Brent crude.
Okay.
I really do. I think we just named three of them, and we're probably leaving three off the list. I think those geopolitical risks, it is a tinderbox.
Yeah.
If Israel responds in any way whatsoever, it's going to go to $100. If Russia And I believe they will. I believe there will be some sort of retaliation, and we're going to see crude spike on that. Over the weekend, we saw Netanyahu take a little bit of a backseat, and he got a lot of praise from a lot of different European leaders and Asian leaders in the United States, but now it feels that they want to do something to retaliate against the attack. Right, wrong, or indifferent. Once that happens, I do believe oil will jump between $3 and $5, so that will take us to basically $95. And then we're just a hair tick away from getting back to 100. If there is an actual conflict between Iran and Israel, you could see 120 and 130, and that's not a joke. I don't know if it'll happen. If you get a couple of missiles that go back and forth, 100 I think will happen. If you get an actual conflict in a war, 110, 120, 130 is certainly within the realm of possibility.
Man, oh man. So for users of energy-intensive businesses like farming, if you're, it's not too late to get some upside protection in place. What do? Do you buy some calls on this? How do you protect yourself?
You could there's calls that are going to be more closely related to. You don't need to do a crude call because it's not a one for one there. You would do a heating oil call because there is no distillate contract anymore on the board. So it's a heating oil, and that's your best bet if you're wanting a little protection from what happens if there is that. They're probably priced pretty expensive right now, and it depends on how far out you want to go on the curve. I'm sure your audience understands how pricing volatility and pricing time works on a call, but that would probably be your best option, depending on how expensive the call is. I think that's probably a pretty good strategy.
Okay. All right. Real quick, what are you hearing on the GREEP model? Is there and the potential to move corn-based ethanol onto a pathway to sustainable aviation fuel?
I don't think it's going to happen in the near future, to be perfectly honest. The carbon intensity of the corn-based ethanol plants within the United States is too high. And so it's kind of a chicken and an egg. You're going to need to do carbon sequestration. You're going to need to do something to lower your carbon intensity score. There's going to need to be a major initiative from the government to subsidize it, because the people that I've talked to that are leading the way in sustainable aviation fuel, just on a model alone, does not work. Even if you're using domestic ethanol as your feedstock, it's just not there. So you would need, and I believe it's $1.25 tax credit to produce a sustainable aviation fuel, up to $1.75 for each point below a certain carbon intensity. Even with that up to $1.75 tax credit, the math still doesn't get you there to make it. There has been announcements just today, actually. I think Boeing placed its largest order of sustainable aviation fuel. I think that's more of a public relations thing right now. We would need to see a vast improvement in the technology to make it a sustainable long-term play. Maybe it gets there. I just don't think it's something that's unfortunately right around the corner. I don't think it's going to affect 2024 or even 2025.
What happens if Trump wins the White House this fall? Does it because there's an attitude that the Trump administration will just clear out all the clean fuel initiatives by the Biden administration. Is that a legitimate concern?
I mean, it's a concern. Change in any administration, whether it's Trump or whether it were, name another Republican, or if it were Biden or name another Democrat, the change is always the question. I think there is some concern, because if you just went back to the last time, and I've always said this, Chip, I'm not trying to be political. I really am not. But if you just look back at the last data set we had from when Trump was there, he had an EPA director that basically gutted the RFS, RINs prices drop. It could happen again. He could also tariff China, and if he did that, that would actually help the used cooking oil, which in effect would help bean oil. So there's a positive spin to a Trump administration there that a lot of people probably haven't thought through.
Gotcha. Man, I enjoy these conversations, Jordan. Thank you so much, buddy.
Anytime. Thanks, Chip, for having me.
All right. You bet. Jordan Fife, President of Trading at BioUrja. I'll be right back to wrap up this morning's AgriTalk.
We've cleared the schedule for you. Give us a call at 855-482-5524 and join the conversation.
Welcome back to AgriTalk. I'm Chip. Glad that you are with us on this Tuesday morning. Davis is off today. He'll be back with us tomorrow. We've got some weather that people need to be aware of. Some severe thunderstorm warnings from just east of downtown Kansas City up to north of Cameron, but south of Bethany in northwest Missouri. So there is a string of severe thunderstorms making their way there. Boy, I tell you what, the tornado watch area covers a lot of northern Missouri into south central Iowa, and the storms are busting out of that area into north central Iowa, western Iowa, and just west of the Des Moines area right now. A lot of south to north movement on the storms right now. So, but this whole system is expected to very slowly make its way to the east and create some issues for a lot of northern Missouri and Iowa as the day progresses. And it's not going away today. It will make its way into the eastern Corn Belt tomorrow. So heads up there as well. Interesting conversation with Jordan Fife, and some of the things we just touched on very quickly and then moved on. Some of the issues I felt we needed to go back to because OPEC, I get questions all the time in here about, listen, if the U.S. is the biggest producer of crude oil, if the U.S. crude oil production is at record highs, why does it matter what is going on with OPEC? Well, it matters because it's a global market. That's the bottom line. And Jordan laid that out very, very clearly. If something is going to impact the price of crude oil, the price of natural gas, the price of electricity in Europe, it's going to have an impact on those markets here in the United States. It is really that simple. And so OPEC and OPEC production having an impact on European energy prices is going to have an impact on U.S. prices as well. One thing that we did not get into, but just last week there was chatter about the Strategic Petroleum Reserve again. Did not get into it because the last time, and you know what, maybe we need to get Jordan back on here sooner rather than later to have this whole conversation. But the last time that he was on, may not have been the last time, a previous time that Jordan was on, he made the case that refilling the Strategic Petroleum Reserve may not be the most strategic thing for the U.S. energy markets to do going forward, or for energy policy going forward. I think there's still a belief that that is going to happen. So anytime we get WTI close to 70, in that $70 to $75 range, that's a floor on the market right now, because the attitude is that we're going to be refilling the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to move forward. He sees a cluttered path for corn-based ethanol into the sustainable aviation fuel market. Came right out and said we need to decarbonize corn-based ethanol. I don't know if the best way to do that is on the production side through the carbon intensity scoring and working on the corn production side to get that carbon intensity score as low as possible. We've talked with producers that are convinced that they can produce corn with a negative carbon intensity score. Well, if every bushel going into the ethanol plant has a negative carbon intensity score, that corn-based ethanol should qualify for sustainable aviation fuel credits, that $1.25 a gallon, all the way up to $1.75, depending on exactly what the carbon intensity score of that ethanol is. So there's that route. The other route is just simply deciding that reducing the carbon intensity score of the corn is not the best path to take. It is a better path to sequester the carbon and put it in a pipeline and take it to North Dakota and stick it in the ground. Still a very, very controversial issue in the state of Iowa and the state of South Dakota, and even in also in North Dakota. It's controversial in Nebraska, in Minnesota, in Illinois, any place that these pipelines might touch. The controversy is following them. The end result, the outcome, I don't think is debatable. If the carbon, if the CO2 from those ethanol production plants is being piped up to North Dakota, it's a zero carbon fuel. And that fuel would then be eligible for use in sustainable aviation fuel and would then be eligible for tax credits. I believe, as I understand it, I believe all the way up to $1.75 a gallon. It is not an insignificant amount of money. Now, what do you do with that $1.75 a gallon? Does that go back to the ethanol plants? And if it goes back to the ethanol plants, where does it go from there? Does it make it all the way back to the members, those delivering corn to that facility for ethanol production? Is that how we end up moving some of the SAF money all the way back to the farm gate? I'm not exactly sure, but these are some of the issues that are being talked about in the industry going forward. Hey, thank you so much for listening this morning. Come back this afternoon. Conversation with Craig Turner from the StoneX Group tomorrow morning. USDA Undersecretary for Trade Alexis Taylor, and a Farmer Forum right here on AgriTalk.